In a small, bustling cafe in the heart of the city, where the aroma of freshly brewed coffee mingles with the hum of conversation, an incident occurred that would send shockwaves through the community. It all began on an ordinary morning, when a black woman entered the cafe, seeking nothing more than a quiet moment with her drink. But what transpired next was far from ordinary. The cafe manager, whose actions that day would reveal a deep-seated prejudice, discriminated against the woman in a way that no one could have predicted. In an unprovoked and violent outburst, he threw a cup of hot coffee at her, leaving everyone in the cafe stunned. What happened next, however, would defy all expectations, changing not only the lives of those involved but also the very fabric of the community. The room fell silent as the hot coffee splashed across the woman's clothes, the sting of the liquid mingling with the shock on her face. People froze, some too stunned to react, others reaching for their phones to record the incident. The manager, his face flushed with anger, stood there for a moment, glaring at her as if she had somehow provoked him. But the woman, her name was Aaliyah, did not retreat. She stood tall, wiping the coffee from her skin with a napkin, her eyes never leaving the manager's. Her silence spoke louder than any words, her calm composure contrasting sharply with the chaos unfolding in the cafe. "I want to speak to the owner," Aaliyah said quietly, her voice steady despite the humiliation she had just endured. The manager scoffed, clearly unprepared for the dignity with which she carried herself. "You think the owner is going to believe you over me?" he sneered, his arrogance unmistakable. But Aaliyah didn't flinch. She took a deep breath, her mind already racing through what to do next. She wasn't about to let this go unnoticed, not just for herself, but for the countless others who had suffered quietly under similar circumstances. By the time the cafe's owner arrived, word of the incident had spread beyond the walls of the cafe. Several patrons, now emboldened by Aaliyah's calmness, had already taken to social media, sharing what had happened. The owner, a woman named Claire, was greeted by a wave of messages and phone calls before even setting foot inside. Claire, a woman known for her fairness and compassion, was shocked and immediately took control of the situation. She turned to Aaliyah, her face apologetic. "I am so sorry for what happened," Claire said. "This is not who we are. I will make sure this is addressed." The cafe manager, realizing the gravity of the situation, began to stammer, trying to explain himself, but his words were drowned out by the murmurs of the crowd. Claire motioned for him to step outside, where a difficult conversation awaited him. The cafe's patrons, still processing what they had witnessed, exchanged glances, unsure of what would happen next. Aaliyah remained in the cafe, her presence now a quiet force of resolve. The incident was far from over, and she knew that standing up for herself was only the beginning. As Claire returned, she promised Aaliyah that the manager would be fired immediately, and that there would be further steps taken to address discrimination in the cafe. But what Aaliyah did next, however, would prove to be the most powerful moment of all. Instead of accepting the apology and walking away, she chose to stay and engage with the community that had witnessed the event. She shared her story, not just of that morning, but of the countless times she had been discriminated against in her life. Her words, spoken with strength and vulnerability, began to resonate with others in the room. One by one, people stood up, sharing their own stories of injustice, some of them never having spoken about it before. What started as a shameful incident turned into a collective moment of healing, and the cafe, once a symbol of division, began to transform into a space where people could come together to confront their own biases and fears. But just as things began to settle, the story was far from over. What Aaliyah didn't know yet was that this incident would set off a chain of events that would ripple through the community, reaching people she never imagined, and ultimately forcing the manager to confront his own actions in a way that would change him forever. The days following the incident were filled with tension, but also a sense of unexpected solidarity. Aaliyah's story spread like wildfire, and soon it was not only local news. National outlets picked it up. People from all walks of life, many of whom had faced similar injustices, rallied behind her, using the hashtag Justice for Aaliyah to demand accountability. The cafe, once a quiet corner in the city, became the epicenter of a conversation about race, discrimination, and the power of standing up against injustice. Claire, the cafe owner, kept her promise. The manager was not only fired but banned from ever working in any of her establishments again. The cafe itself underwent a major overhaul, implementing mandatory sensitivity training for all employees and starting a community outreach program to engage with marginalized groups. But even with all these actions, there was a sense that something deeper was at play, something that had yet to unfold. Aaliyah, despite the media frenzy, was a woman of quiet strength. She refused to let the spotlight overshadow her original purpose, to spark real change. She knew that this incident, while painful, was just a small piece of a much larger puzzle. What began as a single moment of injustice had become a catalyst, urging people to confront their own biases and prejudices. And Aaliyah wasn't finished yet. One afternoon, a few weeks after the incident, Aaliyah received a letter from the manager. She didn't know what to expect, but curiosity compelled her to open it. Inside was an apology, a handwritten one, far from the usual corporate speak she had expected. "I don't expect you to forgive me," the letter began. "I've spent days reflecting on my actions, and I now realize how wrong I was. I was blinded by my own ignorance, and in that moment, I allowed hate and fear to control me. I am ashamed of what I did, and I know I will never be able to undo the harm I caused. But I want you to know that I am committed to changing. I'm seeking therapy, and I'm trying to educate myself about the biases I've carried for so long. I don't know if I deserve forgiveness, but I hope, in time, I can prove that I am better than the man I showed myself to be that day." Aaliyah sat with the letter in her hands, considering the words. She had thought about forgiveness, but the truth was, she didn't know if she could ever fully forgive him. His actions had hurt her deeply, and the emotional scars, though slowly healing, would remain. But she understood something now, something that she hadn't fully grasped before. Forgiveness wasn't about excusing what he had done. It was about freeing herself from the anger and pain that had been inflicted upon her. She decided to respond. "I've read your letter," she wrote, her pen moving across the paper with careful intention. "And I appreciate your honesty. It's not easy to admit the things you've done wrong, especially when you've hurt someone. But I won't pretend that I don't carry the weight of what happened. I've learned that change starts with self-awareness, and it seems you've begun that process. I don't know if I can forgive you yet, but I'm willing to acknowledge that change is possible, not just for you, but for all of us." Aaliyah sent the letter, knowing that it would be the beginning of another journey, for both her and the man who had wronged her. Meanwhile, the cafe became a place for open dialogue, a space where uncomfortable truths were faced and difficult conversations were had. The patrons who had witnessed the incident began to speak out, not just in support of Aaliyah, but in an effort to confront their own biases and preconceptions. Some of them, like the young man who had stood up to record the incident, began volunteering with local organizations that work towards racial justice. Others joined Aaliyah in her pursuit of spreading awareness, helping to organize town hall meetings where people could discuss discrimination openly. As time passed, it became clear that this single event had sparked a wave of change. People began to see that the issue wasn't just about a cafe manager's actions. It was about a larger cultural reckoning that had to take place. It was about the many moments of silent discrimination that people faced every day and the responsibility of each individual to speak up. But still, there was one question that lingered in Aaliyah's mind. Could the man ever truly change? Was his apology genuine? Or was it just an attempt to save face? Only time would tell. But Aaliyah had learned one thing for certain. Standing up for what is right doesn't end with a single act of courage. It's a lifelong commitment to making the world a better place, even when the road is uncertain and the answers aren't clear. Months passed, and life slowly began to return to normal, though the memory of that fateful day in the cafe never quite left the community. The changes brought about by Aaliyah's courage continued to ripple outward, as people who had once remained silent began to raise their voices. The cafe, now known for its efforts toward inclusion and education, became a symbol of transformation. But for Aaliyah, the journey was far from over. The manager's efforts to change were slow, but they were real. He continued with therapy, committed to understanding the deep-seated prejudices he had harbored. He reached out to Aaliyah a few times, trying to find common ground, but she remained cautious. Forgiveness, after all, was not an obligation. It was a personal choice, and she wasn't sure she was ready to offer it. Instead, she focused on the work that mattered most, helping to create a world where such acts of discrimination would no longer be tolerated. Then, one day, Aaliyah received a phone call from Claire, the cafe owner. The manager, having continued his path of self-reflection, had asked for one final opportunity to make amends, not for forgiveness, but to demonstrate the changes he had made. Claire had arranged for him to meet with Aaliyah. It was an unusual request, and Aaliyah was torn. Part of her felt a sense of justice, knowing that he had taken responsibility, and another part questioned whether it was too soon. But in the end, she decided to meet him, not because she owed him anything, but because the process of healing, whether for herself or for him, required confronting uncomfortable truths head-on. The meeting took place in a quiet park, far from the chaos of the cafe. The manager, now looking somewhat different, softer, humbled, sat across from her. There were no grand apologies, no dramatic speeches, only a long silence. Finally, he spoke. "I know I can't undo the past, and I know you don't owe me anything," he said, his voice steady but full of emotion. "But I need to tell you something. I've learned more in these months than I ever thought I could. I've spent so much of my life not seeing the damage my words and actions caused, and I can't change that. But I want you to know that I will spend the rest of my life making sure this never happens again." Aaliyah listened, her heart heavy with a mixture of skepticism and understanding. She had no illusions about him. The man in front of her was a product of his own history and upbringing, shaped by the biases of a society that had failed him as much as it had failed others. But there was something in his voice, something genuine, that made her pause. "I still don't know if I can forgive you," she said quietly, looking him in the eyes. "But I believe in change. I believe that people can grow, even when they don't deserve it. I don't know if we'll ever be able to move past this, but I do know that it's up to us, together, to make the world better for the next person who comes into this cafe, or any place, and feels the weight of discrimination." He nodded, a tear slipping down his cheek. "Thank you," he whispered, though he knew that words alone couldn't undo the damage he had done. Aaliyah stood up, feeling the burden of the past moments shift ever so slightly. "I'm not doing this for you," she said. "I'm doing it for me, and for everyone who's been hurt by things like this." As she walked away, she didn't feel lighter. She didn't feel as though she had reached some grand resolution. But she did feel something. A sense of peace, perhaps, or maybe just the quiet certainty that she had done the right thing. Not for him, not for the cafe, but for herself. And in that moment, she realized that the journey toward justice, toward real change, was never about having all the answers. It was about the courage to take the next step, even when the future seemed uncertain. The cafe continued to thrive, its new foundation built on the values of respect, accountability, and understanding. Aaliyah went on to speak at forums, urging others to recognize the power of their own actions and voices. And though the manager's redemption arc was long and filled with setbacks, it was a journey he had to take on his own. In the end, both of them, Aaliyah and the manager, became examples of something rare. Not just the ability to change, but the willingness to confront one's own flaws and move forward, knowing that true healing comes not from erasing the past, but from facing it with courage. And so, the story of that day in the cafe, with all its pain and unexpected twists, finally came to an end. But its impact, like ripples in water, would continue for years to come.